millionaire offered his jacket to a shivering woman at the bus stop, not knowing she was. Hey there, lovely soul. Welcome back to Noah's Stories. Today's story is wrapped in snow, so come with me into this unforgettable journey. The snow fell thick across the empty streets of New York, the wind slicing between buildings like a blade. Street lights flickered dimly against the whitewashed sidewalks, with only a few scattered taxis passing through the first snowstorm of the season. In the faint glow of a shuttered shop, a young woman sat curled up, her back against the cold wall, hugging a worn-out bag to her chest like it held her whole world inside. Lena Morgan hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days. Even the last free coffee from the train station had gone cold hours ago. Her thin, torn coat barely fought the wind. Her hands were red and her fingernails purple from the cold. But the coldest thing was still the silence. No one, no home, no direction. Footsteps crunched through the snow. She looked up. A man emerged from the white curtain, tall in a turtleneck sweater, thick wool coat, and a dark cashmere scarf. He paused, eyes resting on her. Lena lowered her gaze like always. People walked by. They always walked by. But not this man. He slipped the coat from his shoulders and stepped slowly toward her. Lena flinched slightly, wary. The man spoke, his voice low and warm. "You won't survive out here tonight." She shook her head, managing a weak smile. "I'm fine. You don't have to be." He gently placed the coat over her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled like pine and something clean, like the kind of places she'd passed by but never belonged to. He asked, his eyes steady, "Where's your home?" Lena looked down. "I don't have one anymore." The man was silent for a few seconds. Then he exhaled, looked at the sky, then back at her. "Come with me, just for tonight. Don't be afraid." Lena looked up into his eyes. There was something there, not pity, but kindness. Something she no longer believed existed. After a beat of hesitation, she nodded. And they walked off together into the snow, leaving behind 2 sets of footprints, the beginning of something neither of them could have expected. The townhouse stood quietly on a tucked-away corner of the Upper West Side, its sloped roof and tall windows glowing with soft amber light, a gentle welcome amid the cruel New York winter. Elliot opened the door and let her step inside first. Lena crossed the threshold hesitantly. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been somewhere warm. The house was silent, save for the crackle of the fireplace and the subtle scent of steeping herbal tea. Elliot poured her a cup, then disappeared into the kitchen. Lena sat curled on the edge of a sofa near the fire, her fingers wrapped tightly around the mug to absorb its warmth. The flames cast dancing shadows across her face. Exhausted, hollowed, yet still holding a flicker of resilience. A few minutes later, he returned with a bowl of soup and some slices of bread. "You should eat something," he said gently. She nodded, cautiously taking the spoon. Silence stretched for a while, until she finally spoke, her voice rough. "I don't usually accept kindness from strangers." Elliot didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the flames. She inhaled slowly, then added, "My family, they died in a car crash 6 months ago. My dad, mom, and little sister, all gone." Her voice caught, but she pressed on. "I couldn't cover the hospital bills or the mortgage. Lost the house within a month. Since then, I've been moving." Elliot turned to her, really looking at her for the first time. There was no pity in his eyes, just a quiet understanding. "How long?" he asked. "Almost 3 months." She gave a small, bitter smile. "I used to be a grad student in special education. Now, I clean subway windows to get by." Elliot nodded slowly, as though something inside him had just been confirmed. He stood and said softly, "Rest tonight. We'll talk tomorrow." At the doorway, he paused and added, "I'm Elliot." A beat passed before she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lena." After the meal, he brought her upstairs and opened the door to a spare guest room. It was simple but clean, crisp white sheets, a recessed fireplace, and a small potted plant on the windowsill. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "I'll leave clean clothes at the door. If you need anything, my room's down the hall, last door on the left." The door closed behind him. Lena sat on the bed, hands still trembling. She looked around, every detail too unfamiliar, too kind, too safe. She whispered, almost afraid the air might hear, "Thank you." And for the first time in months, she slept in a room with heat, a thick blanket, and something she'd nearly forgotten: peace. Lena woke to a soft sliver of daylight filtering through the curtains. Everything was strangely quiet. No car horns, no footsteps rushing by, no glares telling her to move. Just warmth and the unfamiliar feeling of being allowed to breathe slowly. Next to the bed was a folded set of clean clothes. A soft sweater, well-fitting jeans, a pair of new socks that still smelled like fabric softener. She changed and walked downstairs, her steps cautious, her heart beating just a little too fast. In the kitchen, Elliot stood by the coffee machine. He turned when he heard her footsteps, offering a subtle nod. "Sleep okay?" "I did, thank you." He poured her a cup and gestured toward a plate of toast and berry jam. Without a word, she sat across from him. They ate in silence, but not the uncomfortable kind. Lena had never imagined that a simple breakfast could carry so much weight. After a while, Elliot set his cup down, running a thumb lightly along its rim. He looked at her, direct but without pressure. "I've been thinking," his voice was calm, steady, "you don't have a place to go." "I have a house I barely use?" Lena said nothing. She knew where this was going, but didn't dare hope. "If you want," he continued, "you can stay. Call it housekeeping if you like. Some cleaning, watering the plants, cooking if you feel like it. I don't need help, really. I just thought, maybe this place could be a soft landing until you're ready." She looked at him for a long time. There was no pity in his gaze, just honesty, and a quiet kind of welcome. "I don't want to intrude." "You're not," he said gently, "but it's your call." Lena drew a breath, something inside her tightening, something that hadn't been touched in a long, long time. "Just for now," she whispered. Elliot nodded, the corners of his lips lifting slightly. "That's all I need." The days that followed drifted like mist, soft, quiet, barely leaving a trace. Lena didn't ask questions. Elliot didn't push. They lived like two silhouettes in the same frame, present, yet never crowding each other's space. Each morning, Lena rose early, brewed tea, and cracked open the kitchen window just enough to let in the silver light glinting off snow-covered branches. She dusted the living room, polished the tall windows with care, as if afraid to disturb the silence that wrapped around the house like a blanket. Elliot worked upstairs. His office door was always slightly ajar, never locked, but Lena never entered. There was a quiet understanding between them, unspoken but mutual. Sometimes they crossed paths on the stairs, in the kitchen, or near the wide front window where the old bench sat. She'd read a book, he'd sit with headphones in, working, but always glancing over. Gradually, the silence between them grew softer, warmer. One late afternoon, while folding clean blankets together, Elliot asked, "Do you like it here?" Lena paused, then nodded. "It's not loud." He smiled faintly. "That's why I chose it." A few days later, she saw him standing quietly before an old photograph in his office, a boy and a young man rowing a boat. He didn't explain, but his eyes did. It was grief, and for the first time she reached out with words. "Your brother?" she asked softly. "My little brother," he replied, "drowned when I was 18. Lena said nothing more. She just placed a hand on the windowsill beside him, standing near. No comfort, no cliches, just presence, holding the memory with him. That night, Elliot poured 2 glasses of wine, not for celebration, but simply because the evening felt colder than usual. They sat on the sofa without music, without small talk. Lena looked at him. Didn't ask anything, but something inside her stirred. Not gratitude, not sympathy. Something quieter, deeper, and just enough for her heart to realize it had started to walk into a place that was no longer just a shelter. Nothing between them changed in any grand or obvious way. There were no long, late-night talks, no accidental hand brushes that felt like scenes out of a movie, but something real had begun to shift in the tiniest of things. Lena started noticing how Elliot always left breakfast out for her, never asking what time she'd be up, how he'd placed a small flower pot on her window ledge, the same lavender she'd once mentioned loving but never having the chance to grow. One morning, while tidying the small downstairs library, she found a model cabin on a high shelf, made of oak with a porch and tiny wooden steps. She froze. It looked exactly like the lake house she had stayed in during a few summers of her childhood. Her fingers brushed over the roof, and her heart sank in a way she didn't fully understand. That afternoon, while fumbling with her first attempt at baking, smoke rose from the oven and Lena coughed, laughing. Elliot rushed in, cracked open the window, and smirked. "An experiment, I assume?" She laughed back, genuinely, for the first time. "Don't mock me, burnt cookies have character." After that, their evenings held a little more light. Sometimes she shared stories of sneaking ice cream from the porch. He told her about falling into a lake once, thinking he could walk on frozen water. They never spoke the word close. They didn't need to. The other person's presence quietly became part of the rhythm, familiar, steady, and strangely empty when missing. One night, the power went out from a sudden snowstorm. They sat by the fireplace with a candle and an old wool blanket. Lena scooted closer, not saying a word. Elliot turned to her, voice low. "Cold?" She shook her head. "No, just didn't want to sit alone." He didn't respond, just tugged the edge of the blanket toward her, and they sat like that, in complete silence, as if quiet itself was healing something words never could. And in the middle of that routine, something quietly began to grow, not from a single grand moment, but from hundreds of small ones, long enough, real enough, to slowly become something they had forgotten how to name: affection. One snowy morning, Lena went down to the basement to find an old tablecloth Elliot had asked for. The room was dim, filled with the scent of aged wood and forgotten books. As she rummaged through a dusty drawer in an old wooden cabinet, her fingers brushed against a small tin box, worn and faded with time. Curious, she opened it. Inside were a few keepsakes, a tiny wooden boat, some colorful pebbles, and a faded photograph. Two children, one boy, one girl, stood by a lakeside no older than 7 or 8. Both were beaming, wearing straw hats, clutching melting ice cream cones. Her heart stopped. That little girl was her. The braided hair, the floral dress. Lena recognized every detail. And the boy, that smile, those eyes, it was Elliot, only years younger. She flipped the photo over. In smudged pencil, the words were still legible. To Lenny. "I'll marry you when we grow up." Elena sank into a nearby wooden stool, hands trembling. Lenny was the nickname her grandparents in Vermont used to call her as a child. She had spent 2 summers near a lake by their home, where she'd had a best friend, a boy she never saw again after her grandparents passed. And now it was all coming back. This wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. She pressed the photo to her chest, her breath catching. Elliot was Elle. A childhood promise, lost in time and buried under years of distance, had quietly found its way back, inside a stranger's home, in a story she never expected to belong to. But fate was never just a coincidence. Lena stepped into the living room, the small wooden box still in her hands. Elliot sat near the fireplace, gazing out the window where snow continued to fall, quiet and soft. She didn't speak, just sat beside him and held out the photo she'd found. Elliot took it, glanced at the front, then turned it over. His eyes paused on the faded handwriting. A long silence. A breath, barely audible, escaped his chest. "Lenny," he whispered, like touching something frozen for years. "When I was a kid, I used to spend every summer at my grandmother's house in Vermont. There was a girl next door. Her name was Lenny. Braided hair, loved collecting colorful rocks. She'd draw on brown paper bags. We'd climb trees, pick berries, build cabins out of popsicle sticks." A smile touched his lips, but it was laced with something tender, almost aching. That last summer, I gave her a ring made of twine, told her I'd marry her when we grew up. She laughed, said yes, but the next summer, she never came back. I waited, the whole season, then the next. No one knew where she went, but I never forgot her." He looked up then, his eyes searching hers, not for confirmation, but for something his heart already suspected. Lena slowly sat beside him. Her hand moved over the photograph. "I remember the ring," she whispered. "And the promise." Elliot's breath caught. He stared at her. "Lena?" She nodded, eyes shining. "I'm Lenny. I didn't come back because my grandparents passed away. Everything changed. But I never let you go. Not in my heart, not even once." Elliot said nothing. He just reached for her hand, firm, steady, like everything he had ever waited for had finally found its way home. That evening, neither of them said much. They sat by the fireplace, the photo lying on the table, the little tin box open between them, tiny wooden boats, painted pebbles, a folded scrap of paper. Just looking at them felt like resurfacing a whole world long buried. Elliot looked at Lena, not the girl curled up in the snow anymore, but the one who had once held little Elle's hand by the lake and the one who had once left. "I used to think," he said softly, "maybe I made you up, a dream I kept to remind myself that, once, someone chose me." Lena turned to him, her eyes moist but calm. "And I used to believe," she whispered, "that no one ever remembers promises made by children under golden afternoon skies." They both smiled, not from sudden joy, but from the quiet relief of a puzzle finally fitting back into place. Days passed more gently after that. Lena still baked and sometimes still burned things. Elliot still left morning tea by her window when she slept in, but now there were no silences, only presence, warm and certain. One afternoon, Elliot took her to a lake outside the city, a quiet place, almost identical to the one in their memories. By the water's edge, he pulled something from his coat pocket, a ring. This time, not twine, but silver. Simple, elegant. "I never stopped waiting," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Not really. And if I could choose all over again, I'd still choose you, even after all the years." Lena took his hand. "Then let's not call it a promise," she said. "Let's call it a beginning." Elliot didn't kneel. Lena didn't cry. But when they stood there side by side, hand in hand, their hearts beat in the same rhythm. Calm, steady, needing no applause, no fireworks. Because real love doesn't need to be loud to be true. It only needs to be found and kept